Hello, and welcome to another episode of my Type 35 build. How about we skip the formalities and jump into the deep end of the pool? Mix a little water and electricity. See who gets shocked first. In fact, I think I'll cast the role of water to the radiator. Did I mention? I installed the radiator. Handsome little fella, isn't he? Actually, I'm pretty pleased with how the radiator come out looking. It was one of the first parts I researched when I started on the car. There's so little room behind the shell that I figured finding a radiator that'd fit was going to take some work. At first I considered a custom-built radiator, but if it ever needs replaced, I'd have to go get another custom radiator built. Yeah, pass on that. So I started looking to see if I could find a factory-style radiator that'd fit, and after a lot of searching, I found this gem. It's designed to bolt into a Triumph GT6, and it nicks in just perfectly behind the aluminum grill shell. So now, if I ever need to replace the radiator, all I gotta do is order another one. I like how well it fits into the shell. It's the same height as an MX-5 radiator, but about half the width, which would be an issue except it's twice the depth. So the total volume comes out nearly the same, which means cooling should be no problem. I tucked it into the shell pretty deep. Honestly, it took me some time to come to grips with cutting into the bottom of the untouched aluminum shell, but it come out looking really slick. Originally, the radiator bolted into the GT6 with 4 vertical bolts, 1 pair on each mounting bracket, but I trimmed the brackets down to fit inside the shell and used a single bolt instead, resting the brackets on a pair of isolators I shaped out of the same styrene butadiene rubber that the shock links are made out of. With the lower mounts taken care of, I needed to fab up an upper mount that would retain the top of the radiator while still allowing enough flex to absorb vibrations. So what I did was, let me get over to the passenger side. So the top bracket is a multi-piece setup. I welded 2 tabs to the top of the radiator, then bolted a bracket to the tabs, which has a rubber grommet that encircles the tail of the motometer. The bracket had to be a 2-piece job because the front hinge mount for the hood is bolted to the bottom of the grill shell with a nut on the motometer. So the radiator bracket needed to be able to slip under and up around the motometer because the motometer is bolted in place before the radiator. When I first got the radiator, though, I thought I was going to have to cut off the filler neck and upper inlet because they were kind of gangly looking. But with the radiator mounted where it is, the filler cap sits in the perfect spot. There's plenty of room to take it on and off with the hood in place, and it pokes out just far enough past the grill shell to look like it was made to fit the car. Gotta say, I'm pleased as punch with it. Oh, and I also bolted the coolant reservoir in place. Yeah, I'm not using a plastic tank on this car. What I did was found an aluminum tank that was sized about the same as the oil reservoir used on the supercharged cars, and mounted it to the firewall in the same spot the blower oil reservoir would have been. Looks the part, and it'll look even better once it gets plumbed with hardline. Something kind of interesting is that these tanks can be had with a screw-on cap or a twist-on radiator-style cap, and I went with the radiator style because I'm going to plumb it as an open system so the tank won't be under pressure, but it'll use the same 15-pound cap as the radiator, so if the radiator cap ever fails, I can swap the caps and keep on going. Now, I'm going to shock you. Really, I'm kind of amped up about this next part, because I got the ignition coil installed, and I mounted it through the dash, just like an original Type 35's magneto. How awesome is that? Short of the originals and the tool room style cars, I can't think of another Type 35 build with a functioning dash mounted ignition. The Radiator is pretty, but this is AWE and then some. The coil pack is bolted to a bracket behind the dash, and along the bottom, rather than using bolts, I carved up an aluminum trim out and mounted 4 latching buttons with one momentary button in the center, which I thought was a cool way to kind of hide the necessary evil of switches in plain sight. The outer 2 are for the turn signals, the inner 2 are the headlights and high beam, and the center button will be for the horn. I could have used metal buttons since the bolts were metal, but I wanted to use glass fuses on this car something fierce, but I couldn't decide on a good place for the fuse box. Then I found these screw cap fuse holders and was like, oh, that's what I need. So matching the buttons with the fuse caps makes it all look really tidy. Or at least it will when I recolor the white lettering on the fuse caps. To provide some dimension to the whole thing, I mounted the coil just proud of the dash a bit, rather than flush with the dash, which I thought gave it a little more character. Last up, the plug wires. The ones that are on it now are just for mock-up while I measure for the wires that are being made specifically to fit this car, because there is no off-the-shelf part with the coil boots, plug boots, and wire lengths I need. But even with the wires running to nowhere, it still looks pretty good, and should look epic with the plug wires running up through the firewall. Couple more bits to install on the dash, turn signal indicators, stuff like that, but I've got more ideas than hands, so give me a minute.